Good morning.
Morning.
So I was talking to Dave last week, and I was telling him that usually when I read the lectionary, I pick kind of the gospel and then one of the passages that sparks it. And this week when I read through and I was reading about the sower, and also I like Jacob and the ladder. Did yours say ladder or staircase?
Staircase.
Yeah, mine does too, but I prefer ladder because that's what I grew up with. So, I thought, okay, I'll work with those two. But the other two kind of interpose themselves into the readings, and I realized that this week it's kind of all four lectionary passages took me on a journey, and I'm going to drag you with me on this journey. So I'm going to start with the gospel, because the gospel passage. Yeah, this was, and when I was writing this, especially in the beginning of the week, I was not having a good week. My joy of working for the government was overflowing, and I was filled with, So I then read the passage, and I come to the kind of conclusion as I read it that, okay, so God planted this field, this wheat, and then these weeds pop up all around us, and as we grow, the weeds grow, and suddenly, boom, we're in this field and we are just surrounded by weeds. And at the beginning of my week, it very much felt like I was surrounded by weeds. And for a lot of people, this image of God just kind of throwing the seeds out there and somebody else throwing the weeds, and then kind of like, wow, we'll fix it at the end. For a lot of people, that leads to their frustration with God, because they say, like, how can God be God if we live in a world where there is war, where there is cancer, where there are people who have rampant greed and are never checked, where there's a world that seems so unfair. Where is God? And is God only coming in at the end? Do we just have to deal with all of these difficulties on our own? And sometimes it can feel like the world is incredibly unfair. And we don't have to look far to see all sorts of injustices. You don't have to look at the news very long and see that there is a lot of despair and hurt and pain and anguish. And a lot of people will say then, well, where's God? Like, did God just kind of leave us on our own? And it can feel that way. It can feel as if somehow we are just sunk into this kind of abyss, and the weeds have completely overcovered and there is no light available. And here's part of my problem sometimes when people read through scripture and they'll pull one passage out and they will use it to justify whatever they're thinking or feeling. Because if we had just this passage, it would feel very much like, okay, that is the case. But as we walk through scripture in all the different aspects of it, we realize, no, that isn't the case. And that God hasn't just left us in this field filled with weeds to just make it on our own and will come and see us at the end at harvest time. We aren't by ourselves. And even though we are at times overwhelmed with the unfairness, with the despair, with the hurt and the anguish, still God is with us. Still we continue to grow. It's not like we have been cut off at the root. We also have life, and if the weeds are growing, so are we. And God has given us signs of hope to be able to continue to grow in and amongst the weeds, and to know that we are making a difference. And here's where, like I said, I started with the gospel, and I was going to go to the passage about Jacob, and then Romans just kind of made its way in. And I, again, went back to the Romans passage, and the end part kind of struck me. And let me just read here from the passage. We know that the whole creation has been groaning together as it suffers together the pains of labor. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we are saved. Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes in what one already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it patiently. And I was reading that and I was thinking, okay, the first part is kind of what caught my attention, actually. It wasn't the hope part, it was the groaning. I'm like, yeah, the world is groaning, we're groaning. And so I checked that. And then it says hope. And hope not in what we already have, but in hope in what we believe, even if we can't see it. And here, this is the part that sometimes I think I get too caught up in what I just see ahead of me, or what is just right here and now and present. And Romans and Paul is telling us, you're not supposed to hope in, I hope that this pulpit will hold my papers. I don't hope, I know, because I can see it, I can feel it. But I hope in that which I don't necessarily always feel, but believe in. And I hope in the presence of God to be with me, even in and amongst the weeds, even if I can't always see it. Even if sometimes I find that I am discouraged, disappointed, struggling, failing to see up, or what I should say is focusing and seeing all that is wrong and not seeing what is good. So I was checking off the little boxes, and it says groaning, yep. Hope for things that I don't always see, yep. And then that last part, and if we have hope, we have patience. And I was like, no. Because I want things to be done immediately. I want the fast fixes. I want God to interact in such a way that kind of wipes the board clear and says, here, Gord, everything's okay now. You don't have to worry. Just go with it. That's what I want. Patience? No, I don't want to have to be patient. I want to be able to receive it now. But Paul reminds me that our walk with God, with the hope, patience is a part of that. And sometimes I am not very patient. Or like I said earlier this week, I was just like, okay, God, fix this. Just make it right. And it was like, God was like, no, you're going to have to walk in this as much as you walk in the other things. And so that takes me to Jacob now. Because Jacob had to have a lot of patience. Now, if we remember last week, Jacob got the birthright from Esau for lentil stew, which still blows my mind. Not that I hate lentils, it's just, not birthright kind of quality. But so he gets Esau's birthright, but that is not enough. Just because Esau has signed off on it doesn't mean that Isaac, their father, has. And so Jacob does something that I still kind of struggle with. Jacob lies to his father. He cheats him, and with the help of his mother, he puts goat skin on his arms, so his father, when he feels them, he tries to change his voice a little bit, and like he basically takes advantage of the fact that his father can't see, and gets the blessing from him. Now, Esau had given it up, but Isaac wasn't consulted. Isaac wasn't talked to about it. Isaac was simply just deceived. And so he gave his blessing to Jacob. So now that Jacob has the blessing, this thing that he wanted, what does he have to do? He has to run for his life. And so you kind of start to think, okay, where's the advantage in this blessing in the beginning? Because it does not seem to be very evident, because Esau is going to hurt him. How badly, we do not know, but Esau is going to hurt Jacob. Because Esau is furious. Even though he sold his birthright, he's still mad because he figured it was his by right. And so Jacob flees, and he's running for his life. And he gets to this desolate place, and the only thing he has for a pillow is a rock. And he puts the rock down, he puts his head on it. And you would think at this point, where he's had to flee from family and friends, from everything that he knows, and he's in the wilderness, you think, what blessing is with him? And that's where God finds him. Not back in amongst the tents surrounded by his family, not when everything is plentiful, but when he's using a rock as a pillow. There God finds him. And I like the analogy. The staircase is okay, but I like the analogy of the ladder better, because in it, the angels are going up and down, but there's still that sense of that the ladder calls us to climb. You don't have a ladder if it's just sticking there and you're not going to go up it, and or staying with the staircase, I guess. But it's that sense of God is inviting Jacob on this journey towards God. And we have to be on this journey. We have to put effort into it. We can just wait. We can just say, okay, God, here I am, fix everything for me, and not do anything. But then we won't go anywhere. We'll just be still. We're called, we're created by God to be part of the journey, to be part of the climb up. And so God tells Jacob, look, you're going to have some hard times. I will be with you. This will be your land. And if you look at the life of Jacob, you might think, oh, wow, God blesses him. And, much like my impatient, then everything gets taken care of. Except it doesn't. He falls in love with a woman. He works for that woman's father for 7 years for the right to marry, and only to get the other sister. And then he has to work 7 more years, and then his father-in-law still continues to cheat him. And then he flees from his father-in-law, and his father-in-law chases him down, but then again, God is with him. Then he has to go and see his brother, who he still thinks probably wants to hurt him badly. And then he fights with God, or we're not quite sure, and gets his hip put out, so he has to limp the rest of his life. Then finally, after all that, his son that he really loves gets sold into slavery, but he thinks actually killed, but sold into slavery by who? His other sons. And then he's living in a time of famine, and at the end he has to go to a new land, not even the land he was promised. So you look and you go, oh. But the story of Jacob is that God was with him in all of those times. And again, it's that reminder that even in the midst of our struggles, even when we're putting our head down on a stone, God is with us. And to hold on to the hope that is spoken about in Romans, to be able to see the light. And however else you look at Jacob's life, Jacob was blessed. He had God with him. He had a life where he felt he was blessed, and he was referred to after as, father of a nation. In the midst of the weeds, we sometimes feel like that's all that we can see, that's all we experience, that's all we'll ever have. But when we do that, we lose sight of the hope that we are given, but even more the presence of God that is with us. Even when we can't see or necessarily feel it, God is with us. Charles had hit a point in his life where nothing was moving forward. We're just kind of, it had been now for half a year, nothing at work, nothing. His last relationship had ended. He didn't really feel anything coming forward. His connection, everything just felt flat. And it was starting to wear on him, and he started to realize he did not have a lot of anything really to look forward to. So one day, on a day off, he decided to do something drastic. His one passion, he loved to go caving, splunking. And he spent a lot of time with different friends exploring. There was a cave network that was still being discovered and explored that was close to his place, about an hour away. And one day he got up on his day off and he says, you know what? I'm going to go into the cave today. I'm going to explore a new part of the cave. I'm just going to go off. And as he's doing that, he looks up and he has this posters of people caving and stuff. And there's a huge poster of the safety rules. And on the top, it's do not go into the cave alone. Number 2 was let people know when you are going. And he looks at it and he goes, not today. Nope, I see you and I'm just going to go in on my own. And then as he's heading towards the door, his phone rings, and he can tell that it's his friend who often goes caving with him. And he thought, you know what? I'm not going to answer because he's going to ask me what I'm doing. I'm going to tell him. He's going to tell me it's a bad idea. I'm not listening to him. This is just, I got to do something. And so he never picked up the phone, put it in his pocket, never told anyone where he was going. He grabbed his caving pack that he has and went out the door. When he gets to his car, realizes it's almost out of fuel. And he's like, should I do this? And there's that moment of, I gotta fill up and maybe this doesn't, but nope. He fills up, drives out there, parks, and goes into the cave, and no one knows where he's going. And he's picked a remote entrance at that. And he goes in, and he has his caving chalk that you mark as you go, because he still wants to come back out, but he's marking it, and it'll show up in the light. So he goes in, and he starts to, there's a well-known path, he zigs instead of zags. He goes off to a new area, he marks, he's been caving for about 4 hours, and at this point, common sense starts to kick in. And he's kind of like, okay, I could keep going, but really I'm pushing things when the ground shakes. And if you're underground, the ground shaking is never really a good thing. And he turns around and he starts to go back. Sure enough, there's been a cave-in. And it's not a cave-in of dirt, it's a cave-in of rocks that he cannot get through. And worse yet, he realizes that it was far enough off the beaten path that no one will have known that he will have gone this way. They maybe if they see the chalk, but it's going to take, no one knows he's here. No one's going to know that he's missing for the next 2 days. And then after that, and he parked his car somewhere obscure. He realizes that if he is going to get out, it will not be because he's rescued. And so he has to now go and explore the new aspects of the cave. And he's scared. And he starts going, he's grateful that he's taken his backpack, his big one, not just a small little thing, because he has energy bars in there and some food and some water, but he knows he doesn't have enough water to survive for very long. The food he'll be okay with, but not the water. So he starts to go on, and he's trying to reserve. He has his lamp on as low as possible to keep but he has extra batteries with. So he heads off down the cave. And after about 2 or 3 hours, he starts to become kind of anxious. Well, he was anxious already, but now it's starting to overwhelm him, and he's feeling like he can't move. And so he starts talking to himself, but that doesn't go very well. So then he figures, you know what? I'm going to talk to God. And he yells up at God and says, God, why did you put me in this cave? And then it's his own voice that answers. And he knows he's talking, but it feels like God is responding to him through him. And God goes, well, I did kind of put up that poster that you were supposed to see. And he goes, yeah, and your friend did call, didn't he? Yeah, and there was even the low on the fuel, and it made you think again, right? Charles goes, fine, all right. I chose to be here. But, and then God says, and again, it's Charles talking back and forth, but it kind of feels weird. But God says, so you're supposed to be able to just do whatever you want, and I'm supposed to fix everything? And Charles says, yeah? God says, doesn't work that way. And then Charles goes, all right, fair enough. But he starts to keep talking to God, because it kind of feels that it feels the darkness. And even though he's providing both voices, it's giving him a different perspective. And he says, okay, God, why hasn't anything been moving forward for me? And God says, well, what have you been doing to move things forward? And Charles says, well, I've been waiting for you to fix everything. And God says, how's that working? Charles says, not well. And they start to talk. and everything. And eventually Charles says, remember when I was in grade 8 and Wilma stole my lunch? And he started to laugh, and he's feeling close to God in a way that he probably hasn't since grade 8 and Wilma stole his lunch. And he's carrying on this conversation. And finally he says to God, God, am I going to get out? God says, that's yet to be known. And Charles says, but I want to know. And God says, what you can know is that I will be with you. In the darkness, this whole journey, you will never be alone. And even though it's Charles's own voice saying this, he suddenly feels the sense that God is with him. And about 2 minutes later, he hears something and he recognizes it as water. And he comes around, and there's a little stream that's flowing around, and he fills all of his water containers. And for the next 6 days, he is in the darkness, conserving his light, slowly moving forward. And every time he starts to think this is it, he comes across some water. And for the 6 days, he's talking to God. And they talk about everything and anything. And Charles realizes that at the end of the 6th day that he's probably not going to get out of here. That he's going to die. But the whole time he realizes he has not felt alone. He has felt like God is with him. And the companionship, the love that he has felt from God has helped him through these 6 days of being in the dark and in the cave. And he's slowly mapping out new area, and he's hoping at some point someone will come and discover what he has done, because he's actually, there was a couple of places where if you've ever been in a cave, you will think that it's a dead end, but the wall will be, and it'll be kind of a crack. So you can't really tell that the cave keeps going until you are actually within a foot or two of it. And he's found 2 of these. And so he's kind of like in a new place, and he's even when he doesn't know his way out, when he finds these, he's like, oh, this is so cool. But now at the end of the 6th day, he's thinking that this is it. And he sits down, he says, thank you, God. God says, you're welcome. God doesn't have to know, because God already knows that what Charles is thanking him for is that indeed he has not been by himself. He has not been alone at all in the darkness. And as he sits down there and he prepares, he smells something, and it smells not good. And that right away fills him with hope, because like what would smell bad in a cave, because there's nothing here unless it was something organic. And it gives him the encouragement to go a little bit further, and sure enough, he comes again to one of those little kind of zigzag Y turns, and he finds himself in a cave. Well, he's been in a cave a whole long, but now he realizes this is a bear cave, because there is evidence of a bear that has been here at some point, and that's the bear droppings and stuff is what he was smelling. And he's like, and he says to God, thank you for not having the bear here when I get in. And God says, not a problem. I figured I owed you something at this point. And Charles runs out of the cave, and he's found, and he realized there's been a huge rescue mission, and people have been looking for him because his friend did recognize that he was missing, and there's been search teams, and they found his car, and they found the cave in. And so when Charles walks out on his own, he calls, and people come, they get him, and then news media says, like, what was it like to be 6 days in the dark by yourself? And Charles, much to his surprise, because he says, well, I spent the time talking to God. And the reporter says, so God told you that you'd get out? Charles says, no, God didn't tell me I would get out. God just told me I would never be alone. We sometimes feel like we are caught up in the weeds and that we are alone. that somehow God has just left us and is waiting for the harvest to fix things. The passage in Romans, the passage from Jacob, they remind us that we are not alone and that we do not walk without hope. I often, when I think about the sermon, I think about what people are going through and different struggles. And I hope that the sermon has some value to you as you hear it and what you are going through in life. I will confess that this week, the person I wrote this for is me. This was the sermon I needed. I needed to be reminded that God is with me, even when God does not fix things right away. Even in the midst of the struggles and the feeling like nothing is going the way that you think it should, still God is with me. And it's that way that God has of blessing me in ways that I don't expect. And I keep thinking back to that passage with Jacob where God finds Jacob where Jacob does not expect. And I realize that God is in each one of our lives in the places where we often don't think to find God. And that we have to stay open eyes, but most of all, open hearts to see that we are not alone. Because there are signs around us. We might not necessarily see the same way we do a pulpit, but we see the presence of God in our lives. Because God has not abandoned us. God has not left us on our own. And if we really look around, we will see a God who is always present with us, perhaps especially in the dark. I told you it was 4 passages. And, I will be honest, when I pick up the lectionary, I often, and I think I even said this last week today, I often skip over the psalm. I look and go, yeah, okay, and so I had gone through with the gospel, and then Romans had kind of interposed itself, and then I was back with the Genesis passage, and then it struck me, it's Psalm 139. And Psalm 139 is perhaps one of the most powerful ones that we will read. And so let me just end in words far greater than mine to why you should know that you are not alone, that God has not left you, that you are not simply surrounded by weeds, but that the very God who created you is present with you. Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path, my lying down, and you are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in, behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your presence? Or where can I flee from your presence? Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and night wraps itself around me, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test and know my thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting.